see and hear me. This is actually my first foray into live streaming. So any indication that you can see or hear me would be very welcome. Anyone would be great, because I'm not sure. Yes, is that a yes? Okay, well that's all right. Oh, that's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your positive feedback. I have Lisa here with me right now. She's just on the phone, so she's going to be here in a second to answer your questions. I hope that you've seen the press release and the little Q&A that she that her and I did on Friday. So if you haven't seen it, you've still got time to review it after this if you want to. I'm also going to record this, if that's okay. I'm going to film this. We will probably not name names when people ask a question. We'll probably just say, "Oh, question has come in," just to keep everybody anonymous. And I'm also not going to. Oh, hang on. Sorry about that. I'm not going to film the side of the screen. Right, hang on. Sorry, I'll be there with you in a sec. Here we are. So we are recording this now. Yeah, so that should be working. I hope everyone's doing all right and they're surviving the lockdown. Look, I'm really so impressed with you guys, and I'm really impressed with not just with your work and all that sort of thing, but with your patience and perseverance. And I do mention that quite a bit, but I think it's really, really important to keep saying it. And we're getting through this unit, and please try and keep all your I guess all your correspondence going as much as you can to me, and I will try and answer them as quickly and as efficiently as possible. I'm just going to call Lisa over because I know we've got a fairly limited amount of time. I'd quite like to get this done in 30 minutes. Okay, I'll just if someone has any questions they want to put up, we have got 3 for a start from someone who can't be with us today, but she's put up some questions first. But if anyone has any questions, and I will try to get to everybody's question if they pop up. But if they don't, then maybe we can have a chance to actually do some sort of post-meeting discussion or something like that. And remember that we've got the 2 seminars this week, or the seminars tomorrow and the seminars on Thursday. So for the seminars this week, we will be primarily going over this assignment. So we'll be working out how to shape it as a story, and talk about angles and that sort of thing. I feel very much like a TV presenter. I'm trying to have as little dead air as possible, and I didn't kind of think that I would be having to do this. But there you go. Come on, Lisa, come back. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Yes, we're on. All right. I've been vamping the crowd, trying to. That's all right.
You should have just yelled.
No, I didn't like to. Okay, everybody, I'm just going to introduce Dr. Lisa Gershwin, who is a world-renowned expert in jellyfish, but is also, if you've read the press release and seen the Q&A, has also got a very strong interest in public health and
that is what I was just talking about,
and all those sort of things. So we're just going to go through some of these questions now. Where can we start? We can start.
Okay, we can start by apologizing for my COVID hair. I've only just discovered my true hair color. It's horrifying, but anyway, I just have to apologize. So thank you for understanding.
That's all right. I'm going to just read the questions and sort of filter them, because I think probably some people might be asking similar questions to each other.
Yeah,
so I'm
sure.
just going to pose them from you guys to Lisa. Okay. So the first one was the one that we had earlier, which said something about the addendum, was asking about the addendum that the press release was based on. And could you just talk to that?
Yeah, so I just checked a couple of days ago on the Legislative Council website, and they have not posted the addendum yet. But the addendum is the document. So you sent them the document, is that right?
No, I sent them the press release.
Oh, the press release.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
right. Sorry. So I have a opening statement that I read to the Legislative Council, and then I gave it to them and asked them to post it as an addendum. You can access it, even though it's not the addendum. You can access it. You can download the audio or maybe the transcript. I think not the audio, but the transcript. And so I'm on the 21st of February. And I'm the very last one on the day. So if you just go to the end and then sort of go backwards, you'll find mine. And so that was where I read it out in full, what will be the addendum.
Okay, and then the next question was, what would you like to see? What do you think should be the outcome of this inquiry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at the moment, there is plenty of research overseas on the connection between salmon farming and nutrients, and salmon hatcheries and nutrients, and plenty of research on nutrients and blue-green algae, and plenty of research on blue-green algae and motor neuron disease, but we don't have any research here in Tasmania linking those here. And so in the very first, most immediate instance, I would say we need to be doing research on this and finding out exactly what our risk is. And I don't even know if we have a heightened incidence of motor neuron disease or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's here. And the cyanobacteria or blue-green algae have been correlated with both motor neuron disease and Parkinson's, and scientifically linked causally, not just correlated, but actually causally linked with Alzheimer's disease. So, this could be a real sitting giant waiting to explode, waiting to stand up. I don't know what sitting giants do, but so I think in the first instance, we desperately need research here to determine exactly what the risk is and what we're looking at in terms of potential and mitigation strategies. Excellent question.
Someone has asked, are there any age groups that are more affected or less affected by this? What do you know about blue-green algae and its relationship to disease? These neurological diseases, I should.
That's a really, really good question. So I don't know the answer to that. I suspect older people are more affected than younger people, simply because all of these neurodegenerative diseases, that is the motor neuron disease, the Parkinson's, and the Alzheimer's, they all take time to onset. And, when exposure takes place, it's a little bit frequently over a long period of time. And so for that reason, I think it's more likely to manifest in older people than younger people. But I can imagine that it's probably time and dose dependent. And I have no idea what our risk is here in terms of how much of that neurotoxin we are getting in our water supply. And so, for instance, for me, because I'm obese, I don't know if that means I'm more susceptible or less susceptible. I have no idea. And maybe if I drink 1 glass of water a day from the tap, then it takes me 4 times longer than if I drink 4 glasses of water a day from the tap, or maybe it's just a threshold. I really don't know. I really don't know. All of these questions are why we desperately need the research here to find out. In my opinion, if we are putting toxic substances into the water upstream of our water supply, we need to know what's going on with that. That's the bottom line.
Are there ways to measure the effects from farms now? Or are there ways to measure the effluent from farms now?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, there are easily ways to measure that. But if I understand correctly, that is not being measured. There was some measuring that took place, I believe, maybe in the vicinity of about 2 years ago by the Derwent Estuary Program. But it was fairly spotty. They were really only, if I understand correctly, and I was not involved with the study, but if I understand correctly, they were looking to see was effluent coming from the farms. And so, they sampled above and below the farms, or well, upstream and downstream from the farms. And so, they were certainly able to detect effluent. There's no question about that. And my understanding is you can see it. You can see it. Of course, it's probably the stuff that you can't see that's in the water that's the problem, as is so often the case.
I'm just reading a follow-on question there. That someone has asked whether the pods they use are ineffective, you think, for containing the effluent going into the waterways. In salmon farming.
What do you mean the pods?
I guess the containment. Do they have containment things that keep the fish in there?
No, they don't.
Oh, okay.
So there's, let me explain. So there's the salmon farms that are coastal, right? They're in the seawater off of the coastline. Like you can see them as you drive along Bruny Island and Huon and whatnot. And so those are these pens, and those are just flow through with the environment. And then up the rivers, they've got some hatcheries that are self-contained, and so they're not discharging effluent, or if they are, I believe it is clean, but I believe they're not actually discharging much effluent, if any. And then there's salmon farms that are simply flow through, and so whatever fecal material, whatever antibiotics, whatever pesticides, whatever is in that water to keep those fish healthy, or is waste from the fish, that's all being discharged into the river. And I don't know exactly how many of the self-contained and flow-through farms there are. I've tried to get that information. It's surprisingly hard to even get something like that. But my understanding is that the number of self-contained farms is a small fraction of the total number of farms. That is, most of them are flow-through, which means all of that stuff is going into the rivers.
There are a number of questions along the same line, so I'll just sort of make a general question. But is there, and just say if this is outside your area of expertise, but is there a way to farm fish that doesn't have this outcome?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So this idea of self-contained farms, they can do this with the hatcheries, and they can also do it with the farms of the adult fish, or well, I should say the growing fish. Obviously once they're adult enough, they harvest them, they don't keep them around. But so the whole raising process that we see the pens out in the ocean, all of that can be done on land, fully self-contained. There are numerous examples overseas where other countries are doing these self-contained hatcheries and self-contained farms. At the moment here in Tasmania, we only have a few self-contained hatcheries. We don't have any self-contained farms. And as I said, my understanding is that most of our hatcheries here in Tasmania are not self-contained, they're flow-through. But the technology is there to do it.
So why is it not being done now?
Money.
Okay.
Money. I think there's a huge capital cost in building one of these self-contained units. I don't know what the cost is relative to how long it would take to get their money back. I'm not in that economics part of that process, but somebody somewhere would have it all figured out. And it all comes down to money, doesn't it? I mean, as long as Tasmania is willing to allow this industry to continually pollute the environment, and now it certainly looks like potentially poisoning Tasmanians. Why would they put that extra money in if they don't have to? I can see the point. If you have a obligation to your shareholders to maximize your profits, which of course every company has that legal obligation to maximize profits, why would you spend money that you don't have to if by law you're not allowed to? So I think maybe the law, I think the Tasmanian government needs to really look back at this and say, hang on, what is the price that Tasmanians are having to pay for this industry to be able to make money? And I think what we're having to pay is potentially neurodegenerative diseases. I think that's too much to pay.
An earlier question was, sorry, I just have to note that I wasn't reading carefully enough. Someone has noted that they're called setting ponds, I think, setting ponds, or setting pools.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Someone did ask, isn't our water tested already?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our water is tested for a lot of things, and I don't know the exhaustive list of what our water is tested for. I do believe that when the nutrients are making the blue-green algae bloom, I think some of those times, I'm not sure exactly what happens. The Bryn Easton water supply, the Bryn Easton water processing facility, I should say. I think they've got some sort of a something or other in place. I'm sorry to be so vague. I don't know the whole process of what they do there when this happens. But my understanding is sometimes when you turn on the tap and there's a really weird odor or taste coming through, that's actually probably the blue-green algae causing that's not being filtered out. So I'm not sure why they would filter it sometimes, but not other times. And I'm not sure how effectively whatever they're doing actually filters out the BMAA. That's, I can't remember the full name of the toxin in question. I mean, it's a name this long, but BMAA is what it's, what everybody calls it, and it stands for some huge, beta something or other. So I'm not sure how effectively the BMAA is filtered out and under what circumstances. I'm also not sure exactly where or how often the water is being tested. For example, I can imagine that the water coming into the Hobart water supply is tested more frequently.
Yeah.
Oh, here you go. Yeah. Oh, that is what it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I can imagine that the water coming into Hobart is tested more assertively than, say, for example, the water coming into, I don't know, pick a small place. I don't know, the Northwest Coast or the Huon, or I don't know. I'm just picking those at random. I don't have facts to back that up. I'm just trying to guess. But more assertively, is that enough? I don't know. I'm just asking. And I guess that's the thing, because nobody is talking about this salmon algae motor neuron disease, or salmon algae neurodegenerative disease linkage here in Tasmania. I think that's where we start, is by simply saying, okay, wait, we didn't realize this. Let's have a look at this. What needs to be done? And the first place with that is obviously research, so that we know what's going on.
Someone has asked whether there's a possibility to actually use environmental filters, say things like seaweed or forms of a biocontrol. Is that a possibility? Are you aware of?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that seaweed can be used to suck up a lot of nutrients. I mean, with great irony, seaweed that we think of as good seaweed and blue-green algae, they're both doing exactly the same thing. There's excess nutrients, they're sucking them up, using it as fertilizer, and they grow like crazy. So it would really be a matter of who's there to suck it up first and grow fastest, right? I don't know of any examples where that's happening in the rivers. And I don't know if it's been something that's been talked about. My understanding is that at least one of the salmon farming companies has been experimenting. This is not up the rivers, this is at the coasts. They've been experimenting with algae sucking up some of the excess nutrients. I don't know what's happening with it. I don't know if it's working or not working or what species they're using. I don't know what's happening, but I do know that the experiment, I think it's been going on for maybe a couple of years now. So, should be something interesting going on there. Whether it's positive or negative, I don't know, but it should be long enough that they would have a feel for, is it working and why or why not.
Someone's just made the observation, and they said a few years ago, the Hobart water system, the water supply suddenly got contaminated and the water tasted really, really bad. Is a massive outbreak a possibility of this blue-green algae? And when we taste bad water like this, is that the reason, or are there multiple other reasons that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my understanding is that the blue-green algae does cause a really funky taste and odor to it. For quite a few years now, I periodically have this taste and odor when I turn on my water. I mean, I just live here close to campus. And so, I'm obviously getting Hobart water supply. And, I turn it on and I go, whoa, far out, what's going on there? And, I have to brush my teeth. It's like, okay, don't get too close, And never for a moment did I think that it could potentially be toxic and potentially be causing me a neurodegenerative disease. Now I'm a little bit more leery about the water. I really want to know, show me the testing, show me the data, show me the science behind why it's safe or not safe. Before you're going to have me drink that water, show me that it's safe. Don't just tell me, but show me. So these blue-green algae, they have outbreaks regularly as a normal part of their life cycle. When there's too much nutrients, that's what they do. It's just like weeds in your garden. You think about if you go and spread some, I don't know, horse poo or sheep poo or whatever, in your garden, all of a sudden, your tomatoes go like crazy and your basil goes like crazy, but so do the weeds, right? Everything's out there sucking up the nutrients. And this is exactly the same. So whenever there's too much nutrients, the algae will suck it up and go crazy. So to what extent those blooms, the toxins from those blooms are making it into my glass of water, I don't know. And that's what I want to know.
I had two other questions, but I'm going to ask this one first because I like it.
Sure.
Is this a product of global warming, blue-green algae?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So blue-green algae have been around for, I think on the order of about 2 billion years, maybe 4 billion years, something like that. They are the world's oldest life form that still exists. And so blue-green algae have been around forever. So there's no sort of, climate change hasn't caused this, right? But that's not to say that there isn't a climate effect. So algae of all kinds, blue-green and otherwise, need a couple of things to develop a bloom. And a bloom, by the way, is just like it sounds. It's just this crazy, like, wah of activity, Sorry, I don't really know how you would spell that if you tried to quote that. So let's just call it a crazy burst of activity, okay? Like a superabundance. And so a bloom requires sunlight and it requires nutrients. And if it has sunlight and nutrients, then there you go. You've got a bloom happening. And so, so global warming, we're having, shall we say, well, the sun shines the same number of hours per day. That's not changing because of global warming, but the cloud cover and the precipitation and things like that are changing. And certainly, the nutrients are changing because of land use. Salmon farming, for example.
Here are two questions which are sort of related to each other. Someone has asked whether the Tasmania's image, its public image.
Oh, you know what? Wait a second. Sorry. I just wanted to go back for a second, back to the global warming question. Let me just add that as the water is warming, that also stimulates them. There's a funny thing that happens with metabolism in warmer water relative to cooler water. The warmer water amps up the metabolism of everything living there. Things grow faster, they live longer. I mean, warmer water just makes everything go, it just amps everything up. So yes, so there is apparently, so I'm not a climate blue-green algae researcher, but what I've read, there is an effect of warming water, a positive effect on them. So anyway, I'm sorry to have interrupted. I just wanted to clarify that.
That's great. Now, the two questions, or the first part of the question is, someone has asked whether the Tasmania's image as a clean and green, environmentally positive place has fostered a sense of, denial or maybe willful ignorance, or even just ignorance of the environmental damage that is going on.
Look, that's a really good question. In my personal opinion, yeah, I think so. I think we're so entrenched in that, that clean green image that, lots of industries down here are going gangbusters building on that clean green image, and yet at what effect to the people that live here, and at what effect on the products that we're exporting. For example, there's another thing that didn't make it into the press release, but did make it into my my opening statement to the LegCo, and that was that there's heavy metals, mercury and arsenic in the salmon as well. And, things like that. I mean, that is not part of the clean green image. Why isn't this being researched? It needs to be researched. And so I think it's easy to overlook these things and say, oh, no, you can't do that. That'll tarnish the clean green image. But good God, I mean, we've got to be researching these things so that we can control them to properly maintain the clean green image. I think here in Tassie, we are mostly clean and green, and I think that's a great thing. I'm here by choice, funny accent, I wasn't born and raised here. I'm here by choice because of that fantastic clean green image. But I do think we sort of look the other way with things that might tarnish that. And I fear that might be part of what's going on here, in my personal opinion.
Do you think, and this is a question which is actually scrolled up, so I can't see the top of it, but I just made a note of it, and I'm not sure if it was meaning the government or the public or the companies, but is it a lack of money or a lack of understanding that has meant that there is less investigation and analysis into this kind of thing?
It's a good question. Look, I have some very cynical views of this, and I'm going to ask you to please filter what I'm about to say through my open confession of my cynical views. My cynicism comes from having been on the inside and seen some things that I disagreed with. Yeah, okay, having said that, okay, sorry, I just lost my train. Can you just give me that question once again?
Whether it's a lack of money or lack of understanding on the part of, I'm not sure if it's government, industry, or the public.
Yeah, okay. Look, no industry and no government ever wants to spend money that they don't have to spend. And I think there is an unfortunate get out of jail free card, which goes like this. Well, we don't have any evidence of that. But just because you don't have any evidence of it doesn't mean it's not happening, right? I mean, I think where public safety and public health are concerned, if there's a hint that there could be something wrong, and here we have a lot more than a hint. There's way more than a hint here. I think the research has to be done. It just has to, because human health and human safety are at stake. I don't know exactly how the politics work, and I don't know exactly how the industry works, but I suspect, and this is me wild arm-waving speculation, I just want to name it for what it is. I suspect, arm-wavingly, that the industry wants to be as little controlled as possible by the government. They want to have to spend as little money as possible on things that don't contribute directly to profits. And as long as the government is willing to look the other way, well, then they just do what they can, because why wouldn't you, right? So in that respect, I think that's probably a normal business approach. I'm not saying that this industry is doing anything that any other industry wouldn't do in the circumstances. That's why we have regulation of industries. You think about mining regulation,
Animal welfare.
Animal
farming,
welfare, yeah, exactly. I mean, just everything. We have all kinds of regulations to keep businesses and industries from doing things that we would find objectionable, that the typical person would find objectionable or unsafe. As for the government, look, funding is scarce. I got to be honest. As a researcher, I can tell you funding is scarce. It's hard to get money for funding. The government has been whittled away, so there's fewer people looking into these things. The regulations have been slow in coming. The regulators are, they've been downsized. And so I think it's just an unfortunate circumstance of events where the government probably doesn't have the capacity to stay on top of this, or has not had the capacity, and so they didn't see it coming. And the industry, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they probably didn't know. They probably didn't know. And if they did, then shame on them. But it's entirely possible they didn't know. I only found out through a strange series of facts of putting two and two together and going, oh my freaking God. And, as my blood was running cold and I was afraid to get water from the tap, I started going, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And, this needs to come out. People need to know this. The research needs to be done post haste. And that's where we are right now.
A couple of people have asked about what they can do personally. Can you boil your water, or are there any other public safeguards to protecting yourself?
Yeah, look, that's an outstanding question. I myself have wondered the same thing. My understanding is that no, boiling water will not help. Apparently BMAA does not break down in boiled water. I think short of not drinking the water and raising hell with your local member, contact your local senator, contact your local member of the Legislative Council, contact the Premier, contact somebody, and seriously, raise hell. If you're afraid to drink the water, like I am, raise hell. And that's what I'm doing. That's exactly, I went to the LegCo and I said, this needs to be looked at, full stop. So raise hell.
Sorry, I've lost my page.
Uh-oh.
A couple of people have asked about the Tasmanian ecosystem, and someone has asked whether blue-green algae might be detrimental and problematic to the environment as well, to flora and fauna around the waterways. And another person has asked whether salmon are native, and same question, whether salmon farming is problematic to the environment.
Excellent questions. I'm really glad you guys asked these. So salmon are not native here. The salmon that are farmed here are Atlantic salmon. I believe they're originally from Norwegian stock. I might be corrected on that. There might be some other stocks that have since been put in, but I believe the original ones were Norwegian. But anyway, suffice it to say they're Atlantic salmon, and we are nowhere near the Atlantic. And salmon are entirely a northern hemisphere species, and we are nowhere near the northern hemisphere. So they are not native. There are many impacts on native species from salmon, both from salmon farming in the ocean and salmon hatcheries up in the rivers. The extent to which these blue-green algae could be poisoning native species, I do not know. I do not know. And I don't think that research has been done here. Any research that's been done overseas, which I am not aware of, I haven't looked for that question, but I think maybe it wouldn't be it wouldn't be relevant here because we have different species. For instance, we have a species of dolphin that's native in Tasmania and Victoria. And so when you see dolphins in Storm Bay, there's a very high likelihood that it's actually this native species that's only known from southern Australia. It's the one that's on the pennycot advertisements where it's jumping out of the water. It's a native species here. And because of its very small distribution, it's fairly rare. It's also obviously protected, being a marine mammal. So to what extent these toxins flowing out into the bay could be affecting this dolphin species, this native, rare, protected dolphin species, I don't know. I don't know of anybody doing this research. Native fish in the rivers, to what extent this could be affecting the fish, I don't know. This research needs to be done. By the way, blue-green algae is also in seawater. It's not only in the rivers, but the toxic blue-green algae can be in both. But obviously the seawater blue-green algae is not upstream of our water supply, whereas the freshwater blue-green algae in the rivers is upstream of our water supply. There are other species that are totally going crazy because of the nutrient output from the salmon farms, like jellyfish and red tide algae. So if you guys have seen the really stunning photos, there's actually Facebook pages for bioluminescence, and you've probably seen some of these beautiful photos of this stunningly blue light at night that's become kind of an iconic southern Tasmania phenomenon. That's actually from a type of non-native algae called Noctiluca scintillans. Noctiluca scintillans is its Latin name. It means sparkling nightlight. How beautiful is that? But Noctiluca is not native here, and it's causing God only knows what impacts on native species. It is toxic, and it's feasting like crazy on all of the nutrients in southern Tasmania. And there's other species as well that are very common, bloom-causing toxic algae that are feasting on the nutrient output from salmon farms. So, all of those are going to have some effect on the ecosystem and the native species that live there. But bugger me, I don't think that's being researched. Just saying. Should be, though. Just saying.
All right, that's good. So, just as a couple of questions, a couple more questions. Can people be affected just through skin contact with blue-green algae, or does it need to be ingested by?
That's a really good question. I don't actually know the answer to that. I think there is a skin effect, but I think the primary route is through ingestion or inhalation. So you got to understand this correlation with blue-green algae and motor neuron disease has been studied many dozens and dozens of places around the world for 70 years, 70, not 17, like decades, 7 decades. This has been studied all around the world for so long. We've got tons and tons of data on this correlation with blue-green algae and motor neuron disease. And there's so many examples where people have eaten seafood that's been contaminated. People have inhaled the air that's around areas where the blue-green algae are in bloom. This is what actually caught my attention at first, was in the New South Wales Riverina district. There's a lake up there where the people that live around the lake, and so this lake has persistent blooms of blue-green algae, and the people that live around the lake have a much higher incidence of motor neuron disease than the rest of the Australian population, or well, the average of the population, I should say, because I believe there's other peaks, little pods of, infestations as well. But certainly there, it's an astonishingly high difference. And I think it's something like 7 times the Australian average in the population is this area in Riverina. So, and there's been, examples where recreational users of water that's contaminated, like water skiers and things, have ended up with motor neuron disease, and that's believed to have been from contact with the water. So yeah, there's lots of examples of different types of interaction with the water that have led to clusters of motor neuron disease. Personally, this is just my personal opinion, I would be very loath to touch the water without knowing for sure, because I think at the very least, if you're close enough to touch the water, you're probably close enough to inhale the the aerosolized particles, or the aerosolized aerosols that would contain the toxins. Look, I'm not really sure. That's getting a bit outside of my understanding. But, I am happy to share some of this research that I've found, with Donald, if, anybody's interested in looking into this more. But certainly it's all over the internet.
Where in Tasmania have these blooms been found?
Yeah, good question. So, the Meadowbank, Styx River, there's another one, I can't think of what it is, that leads into the Derwent, and then of course the Derwent, and also what's the one upstream of Launceston? There's a lake there. I can't think of what the lake is called. Sorry, guys. There's a lake that's the water supply for Launceston. It's like right up above Launceston. And so there's been a lot of problems with blue-green algae in that lake as well. And I think there's been a lot of other places with blue-green algae problems, but that's just kind of, I've gotten that feeling from people I've talked to, but I can't identify offhand exactly which places. Everybody's pretty, zipped mouth about this. It's really surprising. Nobody wants to talk about this. So that makes me worry even more that maybe a lot of people actually do know and nobody's talking about it. I don't know. But I just think, you know what? Let's just put it out on the table and figure it out.
Can you do the research without hurting the environment? Does research itself cause environmental problems? Or
shouldn't do. No, shouldn't do. So for example, you could go out and test the water above and below a hatchery, over a period of time. Either you go there every day and test it, or you put a monitor on and come back and check it, or it beams itself to your desktop in your office or whatever. There's different ways of testing things, of course, and that doesn't have to hurt the environment at all. I think there's I think there's lots of ways to answer this. And then, of course, we already know the correlation between the algae and the neurodegenerative diseases. So we don't need to do anything there. We just really need to find out what our risk is, really.
Someone has asked whether the water use also impacts this, so crop irrigation and that sort of thing. Would it affect with the crops that have been irrigated in waterways that have?
Yeah. Well, so that's a very interesting question. Thank you. So I did find some really interesting research when I was looking into this, that there have been documented examples of crops that have been watered with blue-green algae contaminated water, and the can't remember, I think it was lettuce or wheat or something. Sorry, I'm zoning out. I just can't remember what it was, but anyway, lettuce or wheat, and that crop then actually had the BMAA on the food for human consumption. It was actually on it because of having been watered by it. So, yeah, that's quite serious. I mean, I think a lot of that water from the Derwent is funneled out and used for watering a lot of crops, like lettuce, for example, out in Fawcett or something, right? And probably other places too. I don't really know. But again, why aren't we doing this research to find out what effect that known toxic water is having on the things that it's watering?
Are there any groups who are agitating, apart from people like yourself, researchers?
Not that I know of. I mean, there are groups that are agitating about a lot of things, don't get me wrong. The Derwent Estuary Program has been really, really good at testing and, poking the government and saying, hey, this needs to be looked at. Not this question, but, the question of the salmon hatcheries and stuff like that. As far as I'm aware, I'm actually the first person in Tasmania who has connected this link between salmon hatcheries and blue-green algae and motor degenerative diseases or neurodegenerative diseases. And those are not my original work, of course. I'm just bringing together these different bodies of research from around the world. And, the hair on the back of my neck is standing up and I'm going, I'm afraid to drink the water, But as far as I know, I am the first person who has made that connection between these things. And as far as I'm aware, the first time anybody in Tasmania has been made aware of it was when I presented it to the LegCo on the 21st of February.
And we better wrap up soon because we've got a lot of information now, but just a couple of questions. Whose responsibility is this to research it anyway, to say fund the research for a start? Is this industry's responsibility? Is this government responsibility, do you think?
Look, that's a really good question. I'm not really sure what happens when a public safety or public health issue crops up. I would imagine the government steps in and says, okay, yikes, whatever. But when it comes to responsibility, I mean, let me just break this down for a second. So I think in an ideal world, the salmon industry should want to throw money at this, because if this blows up in their face, they're screwed, right? I mean, that's my opinion. I can see that potentially being a really big deal if people go, oh my God, you're poisoning people. That could go very badly for the industry. So I would imagine that the industry would want to fund the research on this and have it independently looked at by, for example, UTAS, IMAS, and, credible researchers to look at this and find out what the risk really is. I can also imagine that the government would want, again, credible independent researchers to look at this and really figure it out, so that there's no potential for impropriety in the results. So, I don't know who ultimately has to fund it, but I can tell you somebody needs to, because we should know that the water we're drinking is safe.
Look, I'm going to leave it there. I'm sorry if I didn't get to everybody's question. I hope I kind of provided a well-rounded, I guess, summary of questions. And, if hopefully, if your question didn't get asked, then the crossover would have been there somewhere else. But I will talk to my groups tomorrow. But thank you very much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
We'll give you a...
Thanks, you guys.
We'll give
awesome
you
questions.
A virtual clap. And we will see you guys tomorrow. Okay.
Bye, you guys. Great questions. Seriously.
Bye.
Well, that was fun.